the current regulatory powers are adequate for the vast majority of this market. And I would tend to agree with Gary Gensler that most of these tokens are securities. There is a bit of a gap with the CFTC's jurisdiction. They have regulatory power over derivatives, but the cash market, the actual crypto asset itself, they only have enforcement authority. So that is a gap that could be fulfilled, but that's a very, very small part of the market. Most of these tokens, most of these assets, especially the problematic ones, I think appropriately fall under the SEC's jurisdiction. And the SEC, frankly, just needs to go after them more aggressively.
Sheila, what about the controls that were in place for banks carrying out fiat transactions on behalf of cryptocurrency companies like FTX? Do you think that they were sufficient, given your experience, of course, as a banking regulator?
So I think that the exposure to the regulated FDIC insured banks was very, very limited. Obviously, they had bank accounts. Everybody needs a bank account to do your regular transactions, payment transactions. But it does not appear that there was any significant exposure. There's been a lot of press coverage about FTX, or maybe it was Alameda, taking a significant investment interest in a small bank in Washington State called Moonstone. They renamed it Moonstone, but as far as I can tell, that they hadn't really used the bank for anything. So it just looks like, to the extent they were using banks, it was for bread and butter payments. I don't think this affects the banking system at all. So that's the good news, that it does not really have any kind of impact on mainstream banking or the insured banks that we all rely on for our own, checking and savings accounts.
But the banks that did work with FTX and Alameda, do you think that it was a mistake for them to bring FTX onto their platforms?
That is a really tough question, because there's been a big controversy generally about whether regulators should, tell banks, you just can't do business with certain entities, certain markets or certain, and that's hard to do. I think if a business is legal, then to tell a bank not to have dealings with them, I think is hard. And I am unaware that any of the entities doing business with U.S. banks were illegal. So I think it's hard. It's a very controversial issue to try to use insured banks to shut all of this down.